I have people ask, how do we build friendships, or, my friends don't want to talk to me about anything. Why is that? And so as we dive deep and go through it, one of my favorite questions just in relationships to ask somebody is just tell me more. And that's not just because it's an easy fix. It's because typically there isn't the right question to ask in that moment when somebody's pouring their guts out to you, or also telling you about, hey, I just got the promotion at the job. It's just tell me more about this job. Tell me more about, what's hurting you. Just tell me more.
Welcome to Something More Human. I'm Sam.
And I'm Elliot.
Post-pandemic, it feels as though our social skills have atrophied.
It feels like the barrier to entry to meeting new people and cultivating community is higher than ever before. But we believe that meaningful relationships are the key to a fulfilling life.
So we're ditching the surface level conversations to ask and answer questions all about human connection. Join us in creating something more human.
Ben Higgins, finalist in The Bachelorette season 11, The Bachelor himself in season 20. Your Bachelor breakup was the most Googled breakup of 2017. I know that you know that. But you found love again, and now you're married to your ride or die. You own Generous Coffee, a for-purpose company donating 100% of proceeds to nonprofits. You're also an author, an only child, a Cubs fan, shout out. They're probably going to miss the playoffs this year, but that's okay. You never know. And you're from Warsaw, Indiana. But like you said in your book, you'll always be stripped of your labels in time. And we've described our phone-free event series entitled Return to Real Life as an event where you're meeting people not to talk about what you do, but about who you are. And we've already read your Wikipedia page. So Ben Higgins, who are you?
It's a great question to start out with. I think at this point in my life, I am a curious pursuer of joy would be kind of where I'm sitting now. I'm also, I want to, if I give myself some labels, I'm also loyal. And I also am beginning as I get older to understand my place in the world where, you just mentioned some of the things, they kind of put you on a pedestal or throw you out there and you feel these moments of like being super important or what you think, and as I get older, I just like am becoming more comfortable with my place in this world. And it's still a level of importance, but it's not like on a pedestal. And I'm really happy about that. Like it's a very good place to sit.
Nice.
I totally want to circle back to this idea of like, you as the Bachelor, you are so much more than that.
Yeah.
And your time has passed, right? Like the Bachelor season still exists. People can still watch it. There's incredible YouTube videos, but you're kind of a different person now and you do so much more than that. So I want to like double tap into that in just a bit for sure.
Okay.
This part kind of came not really last minute when we were doing our research, but I realized that in our 20 plus episodes, only one of our guests has been a male, and he was actually with his wife and business partner. So this is the first Something More Human episode where we have a solo male that's really on the podcast to ditch the surface level conversation and talk about human connection and the things that you're currently doing in that realm. So I think, people like you and I are more willing to be open. That was very evident on The Bachelor right away, even The Bachelorette, honest and vulnerable, even to a fault, whatever that even means for men. Other men might say it's a sign of weakness, and that might be the case for them. But for me, it's a part of who I am, and I think what creates an ability for me to connect with other people. So, and that's a tool that, I really can't throw away. It seems more and more difficult to connect, especially in 2024. It just seems really, really difficult for men to find each other. So I told Sam I wanted the opportunity to ask you as many questions as possible in hopes other men would listen and be inspired by your openness. So if even one person takes it to heart, then that's a win, and I think that you could probably agree with that.
100%.
So, yeah.
So of course we did our research. We did read your Wikipedia page, of course.
Thank you.
We did go on your website. We're really excited about the connection deck that you have on there. And as we sort of like think about how we as interviewers level up, how we think about curating spaces for people to connect, we were just really inspired by the deck. So we've kind of chosen one from every category that we wanted to like speed round through with you.
That's great.
Yeah, we're going to flip it back on you, so...
And I will say, I appreciate already you did do your research, because oftentimes when I sit down for interviews now, especially talking about Generous, people assume it's a nonprofit and not a for-profit company. And there's a big difference there. And one of the big differences in why we do what we do, and you already said it's a for-purpose company, which takes your research, because oftentimes people miss that. And then it's kind of going back and explaining it. So I appreciate the research you did, and I'll answer anything you ask.
Sweet.
Or at least try to.
Sweet. We're excited about that. I'll just start with the first one. This is a tough one. But you and your team came up with the connection deck, so you have to answer for it. What is your definition of love?
Things have changed consistently in different seasons of life for me. As a younger person, love was an acceptance and also kind of this euphoria. I've felt that love for others, for people, for maybe a pet, for a space, and felt that euphoria kind of come up, like where everything's brighter, everything changes. And then I meet my wife now, and I fell deeply in love with her. But now I think my definition is a commitment and an acceptance. There's still moments of euphoria. It doesn't happen every day. It doesn't happen in every moment. But now it's just this commitment and this acceptance that we live in and breathe in every day, where there's a comfort to that. There's not a fear of this is going to end or this is going to at some point separate. It's just a waking up every day and knowing that I get to, and I'm hoping she would say the same thing, but she gets to be committed to me, that we're learning about each other, that we're curious about each other. So to summarize all that, my definition of love right now is a consistent commitment and acceptance of wherever we're at in life.
I know we said speed round, but I kind of want to ask you. I love that response. And I think that something that we've had a desire to do on the podcast is really kind of dive more into how men feel about things, because it is more socially acceptable for women to sort of open up and be vulnerable, especially on the internet. So can I ask you back?
My definition of love?
Yeah, no pressure following that answer.
Yeah, that wasn't scripted, not prepared. Maybe that's a really tough question, but I think we sort of talked about it on another episode in relation to friends, and I think that I don't want to piggyback, but you use the word commitment, and I think that is exactly how I feel about, when I think about love, I think about our relationship, and I think that's really what it comes down to. I think it's for you and I. What I wrote to you that I talked to you recently about was that, like, our love has never been easy, and I think that that's okay. I think that it requires work from us. And I think that equals commitment. And without that commitment to working every day, even when some days are utter failures, then it's kind of worthless and not worthwhile. And so, yeah, I don't want to steal from Ben, but I really do feel like that is what it is, because like some days it feels like the love, not that it's not there, but it's like you said, it's not euphoric, it's not good, but we always come back to each other. Well, I'm just saying we always come back to each other. You know what I mean?
No, I totally
sometimes we don't like each other, but we're always working.
100%.
You've said it many times. Love is not found, it's made. And like that is the definition of our love, our relationship. So that's my best answer.
Do you want to talk about the hat?
Yeah, these are our hats actually. And if not love, then what? I think it's a great question. And it's definitely somewhat of a conversation starter. Actually, my sister, the first day I was doing research actually for this episode, I was at Copper Door, and she sent me a long video. If you know anything about Archuleta, that's my last name. There's definitely some like feistiness and anger, issues that we have to work out, with my sisters too. And anyway, she said when she put the hat on, she said that she realized that she had to like almost be like a different person or like an ambassador for the hat that she was wearing, because she is prone to like impatience and these different things, anger. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I think that's kind of why we made the hats, because people have come up to us and asked us, what's the answer to the question, So yeah, just some words I had in my head for a really long time, and then the podcast came, and I was like, these words are meant for some merch for people to see out in the world, and so that's why the hats exist. I don't know if I answered it the way you wanted it to, but
I love it. We'll go back to speed round now.
Yeah, it's a good one. Kind of a change.
What keeps you up at night? These aren't really speed round type questions. They're kind of deep, but
yeah. Right now, what keeps me up at night is it's random. I'm in a better place. But if you would ask me this 7 months ago, I'd have said I haven't slept in 3 weeks. And it was random, just like intruding thoughts, worst case scenario thinking. It could have been about my dog. It could have been about my wife. It could have been about finances. It's the things that everybody is concerned about. But anxiety was taking over, and it would almost become where there was just this constant cycle. And so on my phone, I have this list of concerns, worries, fears that popped up at 2 a.m, and I would just write them down and then agree to confront them the next day or read back through them the next day. So I think it's changed so much. I am prone though to worry. I'm prone to anxiety. And so there's a lot of things that keep me up at night. I would say if I had to talk about the biggest thing or the most consistent thing, it would be, am I doing enough with what's been given to me? Is a question, and then that spirals from there. But that's usually where it comes from. It comes from a place of envy. I've had to set clear boundaries in my life where social media is not a thing I look at past a certain time or before a certain time, because what would happen is I'd get on there and I would get envious. And that envy would then translate into questions and this spiraling effect where I'd say, well, I'm not doing enough. Look at that person thriving. Happy for them, I think, but also very jealous. And why am I not doing that? And I had to stop that because it was never healthy and it was never good. So I think that would be the most consistent thing that I worry about that keeps me up.
What's the best piece of advice you've received?
I don't know if I've gotten a lot of advice. I've done a lot of work. Talk therapy is helpful with this kind of stuff in a sense, but there's not a lot of feedback. I think for me, I needed feedback.
Sure.
I've done neurofeedback, which is more of a brain training exercise, which has helped tremendously. I've actually done it here in Denver. That's been awesome. I think the best advice is honestly something that just came to me, which was write this down, confront it the next day, and set boundaries for being honest with yourself. Social media brings about a lot of envy in my life. Okay, great. So if that's the case, what boundaries do I need to set? Because that envy isn't always coming from a truthful place. It's just, and so that's been the best thing I've done. But I don't know if anybody actually told me that more than I was just like, hey, I need to stop looking at this, all day.
That's pretty, pretty relevant, because same thing with me and social media and Twitter specifically. But the question I have is, I think that advice is incredible. I was trying to figure out where you were going. You're like, I'm, up late at night writing my worries down. I'm like, where is he going with that? But committing yourself the next day to confronting them. But how do you create accountability for yourself? Because if you don't confront them the next morning, I mean, what is there to lose? I mean, it's not like you're gonna,
Sure.
cease to exist, or your wife is gonna divorce you or something like that. So there's not a magic pill, but what would you say, is the thing that keeps you accountable to actually waking up, looking at it, confronting it, and doing something about it,
I think my personal growth. So I think for me, if I stop losing the desire to grow, then yes, I would probably not hold myself accountable. But I have this deep desire to grow and to try to be a good husband and a good son and a good friend and hopefully one day a good father. And so growth is a part of that. And so I do have to hold myself accountable. So, outside factors would be, I have a group of 4 friends that when something is really bothering me, like when I feel like I'm paralyzed by it, when I feel like I can't figure out the good issue, sometimes that's, things within my marriage. And I'm like, I can't talk to my wife about this. This is only going to cause more conflict. I got to get some accountability from an outside group. But I have 4 friends that I can call on, that know to celebrate me when celebration's necessary, but also to hold me accountable, to check me when that is necessary. That's been a practice that I've really implemented since the show, because when chaos is swirling around you and everybody's telling you who you are, you start to forget it. And I needed outside voices to kind of hold me in check, but also be willing to be like, hey, you're doing great, because you need that too. And sometimes that's not accessible. Sometimes nobody's telling you you're doing awesome. And so that, I would say, would be the accountability factor. But for when I wake up and I know I'm going to confront it, it's now a challenge that I appreciate. And I've also, I think, learned that if I don't confront it, that just gets worse over time. That's doing me no good. It's just it's really a self-harming practice to not be internal, to try to figure out what's, causing me issues, and then to try to figure out a solution.
Right. The 4 friends you're talking about, I'm assuming they're all males.
Yeah.
Okay. kind of a big deal. I don't know. I have done a little bit of research, listened to different podcasts. You're talking about, you did back then anyway, about being on the outside looking in. And I've had the same thing where, we're walking to the Cheeseman Park and I'm like, wow, there's like 20 people in a group. I'm like, I've never had that many friends. Like, what is that like? First of all, they're probably not all best friends like I'm imagining them to be, right? Some of them probably don't even know each other. But to have 4 friends that you can count on in that way is, I would assume that how impactful and how immeasurable that really is. Have you guys had those very specific conversations though, of like, we all need to agree that although there might be some feelings of envy when one of us is doing really good, that seems to be natural, like that we are committing ourselves to, telling each other, hey, you're doing a good job, or when you're not doing a good job, hey, like, you need to kick it into next gear. You said you were going to do this last week. It's next week. You haven't done it yet. Do you guys have those intentional conversations, almost like this, not rules that you're setting or commandments, but like just this, these intentional conversations where you come together and say like, this is how we have to operate in order to keep this group together essentially?
Yeah. So to be clear, not all those guys are friends with each other. So these are this is my core, right? Gotcha. So it's kind of one-on-one with each of them. Yes. So we have had those intentional conversations. Again, going back to my really 20s, when the world seemed like it was swirling around me and I was asking myself a lot of questions about meaning and purpose and value, I would reach out. I started to reach out to them, reached out to a lot of people. These were the 4 that I'll say proven. I don't think that's a fair word to use, but they proved that they were honest, that they were going to share truth, that they cared, and that they were giving me good advice, like advice that felt different than just your normal everyday passing by person. They were giving me like wisdom and knowledge that I needed at the time. And so that's kind of where we started to enter into these conversations. And in seasons of my life, I've been pretty broken. And so it's almost like an easy conversation for me to have because it's a call for help. In a sense, it's almost like a prayer where you're like, please help me. Like I need something here. My story comes back to Denver, where I moved out here with no friends, by myself, in an apartment in a small little town. And really for a year of my life out here, still had no friends, was working a job and had no community, no connection. And I was searching for it. And then 6 months later, end up on national television. And so I was having these massive switches and also feeling very alone. And so this, for me to enter into those conversations with them was a cry for help. Like, hey, at this point in my life now, I've done this thing alone for too long. I need people. So yes, we've had those conversations, but they don't necessarily have them with each other.
Gotcha.
I like that clarification because I also was like, the group dynamic or hosting people kind of together in the same space, virtually or in person. We've talked a little bit about like your inner circle, and that sounds like this is kind of your core inner circle.
Yeah.
Would you rather ask your future self a question or give your past self advice?
Geez, that's a good question. I like that.
We can't take credit for it.
No, I didn't think so. I'd say ask my future self a question. I don't think looking back and giving myself advice would be that helpful outside of just making me feel ashamed or guilty, or again, going back to, oh, you could have done it better. And I don't necessarily love to live in that space because I kind of already do.
Sure.
Too often.
Now, to get even more hyper specific, is this like a year in the future? Is this 5 years in the future? Is this like when you're 75 and you've lived most of your life? You're hoping that, you've done the things you wanted to do? Yeah,
I think legacy is a huge part of kind of my being. And so at 75, I would love to be able to look back and say, hey, you did well, with what you were given. You gave more than you took. I think a year, keeping myself in check. So I'd love this to be a year from now, just to continue, that ride. I hope to live to 75. And I hope when I get to that point, I've had 75 years of questions and checking myself to make sure I'm doing what I can with what's on my plate. I think that would be healthier.
Yeah, I agree with that. Last one.
Okay.
What type of person do you find it difficult to connect with?
Self-describers. I don't know, I think some would call them narcissists. I don't know if that's fair. I think that's too much of an umbrella term, and I think self-describing is too much of an umbrella term. I haven't quite figured out. I have a hard time with people who feel like they have to prove themselves to anybody by telling me who they are.
Sure.
Like I am, I have too big of a heart, or, I'm very selfless, or, those types of people in the midst of a conversation or random act. It comes from an insecurity, which I want to have compassion for.
Mm-hmm.
But kind of going back to what you said at the beginning, my hope is that people can get to a place, at least with me, where they don't have to prove themselves. They can be vulnerable and be like, I struggle with this and this and this, or I'm very proud of this and this and this, and they can let other people tell them, maybe who they are to them.
Right. I'm glad you brought this up because I listened to that episode, Typology. Talked about your Enneagram. You're a 4. I'm a 4. We're like very similar in a lot of ways. Maybe a challenge or a question is, I guess, I wouldn't see myself as a self-describer, but as 4s, like you and I have a desperate need to be understood.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So do you think that what do you think that the difference is between like a self-describer and people like us who are trying to explain ourselves?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
It might be like one of the biggest conflicts for 4s, because what we really want is for people to know us. We don't feel like many people do know us, but I personally want them to figure it out. And I assume that people also want to figure it out. And I don't think everybody does. I don't think it's part of their personality. I think it's a very unfair place for me to hold them, where it says, you should understand me better, but I'm not going to give you a lot.
Sure.
To
it's like a game.
It's like a game. As 4s, we desire authenticity. We desire that curiosity. We desire that creativeness. And so one of the things I find most enjoyable is human story, and then kind of figuring out who you are from that story. I don't think that's everybody, and I think I should be okay with that.
Yeah.
So it's a consistent conflict, I would say.
Sure.
It's probably why I feel so often like an outsider, because I feel like, hey, you should understand me. And they're going, but I don't. You've never told me who you are. So yeah, I'd say it's a conflict. That would be my best way. It's a consistent conflict socially for me.
Yeah. Okay.
I feel like that's not maybe too high of a standard. I think there's totally a spectrum of like where there's a line, but as we get older, as I get older, the things that I desire from people in my life are like to really actually give a shit.
Yeah.
So I think that having this expectation or hope that people are curious about you and ask you those questions, like, oh, you've never told me. Well, you've never asked.
Yeah.
I think there's kind of a push and pull there definitely to be had. And there are so many gray areas in the world and the human experience that is certainly one of them. For everyone listening, you can download this deck on Ben's website. I'll link it below for all the peeps. I want to circle back to what we were talking about earlier, kind of around this notoriety, this label of The Bachelor. You had a lot of limelight. Obviously, your breakup in 2017 was the most Googled breakup. How have you dealt with the separation of Ben the Bachelor and all of these other facets of who you are? Because you're not totally distinct and separate and cut off from the franchise. Like you still co-host a podcast, you go to franchise weddings, like you are still a bit a part of that world. You've expressed a desire maybe to host in the future. How do you balance both of those things being true at the same time?
Well, I'll compare it to other people I know who come off the show with similar desires to, what I have in life and to what they have in life. A lot of people say right away, hey, I want to grow beyond the show. I want to be known for something other than the show. I think that's most people's initial reaction. So if we relate it to anything else in life, if you're a CEO, if you're a leader of any kind, if you're, a doctor, a nurse, whatever, that label, you say, I want to go beyond that now at some chapter in your life. For me, it really changed when I said, I'm just going to own both. This is a huge part of my life. It will never not be a big part of my life. It's a massive chapter. If I say that, I was on The Bachelorette and The Bachelor, but then there's the post-show, years where that is what you're known for. It's probably what you're getting hired for. You're getting still paid to do stuff because you were The Bachelor. If I said, hey, from 25 to 31, 6 years of my life where that was really a massive label in my life, if those were just a waste and I'm not going to still own those as a piece of me, then I feel like that'd be really sad. So I just started to say that's who I am. Like that is a part of my story. yes, I think there's a depth to that story that maybe wasn't shown on television, and not everybody understands the inner workings of what happens when you're on the show and kind of what that does for you and what it does to you. But now it's just me saying that's all a part of, where I'm at now, and being okay with that. And so that's why you still see me a part of the show at some level. It's not, my main focus. It's not what I want to do all the time. But it's also something I'm not ashamed of. It's something I'm very proud of in a lot of ways. And I also think it brought me to my wife. It's been a door that was open that's led to many good things. And so as a result, I don't want to push it aside.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know how many, this is some research I haven't done. I don't know how many bachelors or even bachelorettes, but would you say that some of them are there? Some of them have maybe didn't have a good time on the show, or even if they did, they're like, I don't want this to be a part of my life at all. Like, I don't want to embrace it. I don't want to be known as that. I want to be known as this. Versus you've embraced both. Have you noticed that there are some that are the opposite?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, and some do it really well. I still think, let's maybe use like child stars for example, right?
Sure.
Alfonso Ribeiro, like an incredible talent, host of America's Funniest Home Videos.
Oh, sure.
Also on Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. So I know Alfonso, great guy, tremendous talent. But people still know him from his dance on the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. This is one of the best examples I can give in relation to me. And they still ask him to do that, right? He can either do that with this or he could say no to it when somebody in public goes, can you do the Carlton dance? Or he can say yes, because I know that's what you know me from, and I appreciate that is a piece of what's got me to where I'm at today. Same thing for me. I always think that people will know me from the show. I hope they know me from the show and more. At least they can associate me with something more than just the fact that at 26 years old, I was the Bachelor.
Right.
But I do think it's a consistent battle with most of the leads that come from the show, or most of the people that come from the show that have any notoriety or any kind of recognition. They come off and they say, I want to move beyond this, because it is a desire, and it is what feels like what you should do. I've been handed a platform. I've been put on TV. Everybody knows me. Now I got to become a host or an actor or an actress, or I got to do X, Y, Z. And it works sometimes. But a lot of time it comes with a lot of pain, because I think that show is such a force that most people will still always say, yeah, you were the Bachelor once. And I have to get to a place in my life where I'm comfortable being like, I was. Like, that is a piece of me. But yes, I think it's a consistent struggle and battle for most people coming off the show.
Yeah.
You're kind of going there around, like, there's a lot of shoulds in the world, especially when you've been given this platform. How have you dealt with, and how has it changed being kind of subject to so many people's opinions, both virtually, and you've talked about people coming up to you in person? Yeah.
Well, again, because of my personality type, I'm very susceptible to criticism. It paralyzed me for a season. I tend to focus on the criticism more than I focus on the positives. And I also think they just stick out more. I don't know. And so for me, it started with, I've got to build my brand. You have a whole team around you that I built of great people that are helping you build your brand. Who are you? What are you? What can you be marketed for? What kind of talents do you have? What are you excited about? And they build this machine around you. And that was great. And for a period of life, and it brought great financial success, but it was very empty. And it felt like I was always running a race that was exhausting. You would show up to an event, you'd put on your best face, and then I would go back to my hotel room and just like crawl into bed, because I am also an introvert, and be exhausted and be like, I hate every second of this. This isn't who I am. This isn't what I ever dreamed of. This isn't what I ever desired. And what I was really doing was building a brand that made me richer, more famous, but it wasn't doing anything for anybody else. It was like I was on my own little island.
Sure.
And so one of those friends that we spoke about earlier, when I was kind of in my lowest place, and I was looking for the outside voices to tell me how cool I was, to tell me that I had moved beyond The Bachelor, to tell me I was great, he told me, what if this is never meant to be about you? What if this is always meant to be about something greater than you? So the switch in my life happened when I said, okay, I'm going to trust that advice because it feels like when he said it, it felt like a burden was lifted and a peace was brought. So I'm going to trust that advice. And what can I do now with this platform that's been handed to me, with the best of intentions? And I'll go back to why that statement means a lot to me now, and build something that's not so focused on myself, but focused on others, that I can still be a part of. When I say intention, that's how I get through the criticism. That's how I even get through some of the praise and worship, is knowing where my intentions lie. I've messed up. I've messed up publicly. I've messed up, in private, all those things. And to take in that advice, to not be somebody that just pushes all the criticism aside, but to check myself again to what was my intentions there. To be willing to be molded, and to willing to hear how I've hurt people, to be willing to hear how I've affected people with my words, with my actions, with my statements, or in any way I've lived my life, and to be able to apologize, but also to know, what, was true to me at the time. Criticism is going to come. Yeah. It is. My wife is one of the sweetest, purest, most intentioned people I've ever met. She still gets criticism on social media. If she can get criticism, anybody can. Trust me. And I've told her, and we've talked through that. It's just part of it. Humans have pain, and they're not going to, hurt people. I think it's a very true statement. And so you just have to give a little compassion to those statements, but also be willing to hear them if what they're saying is true. The world's moved fast over the last 10 years. I come from small town Indiana. I'm sure I've done things, said things, believed things that have hurt people deeply. And I'm always trying to, hear that and figure that out, while at the same time keeping my values, true. So yeah, I guess just trying to be honest with myself would be the best way I've dealt with, and just understanding it's part of it. It's going to happen.
Yeah. Right.
Do you feel like that is the same answer for dealing with sort of like an internal battle of ego? Like, you suddenly have a blue check mark. Back in those days, like, that was huge. That's sort of how you met your wife. Like, balancing people's expectations of you, your internal perception of people's expectation, and then the ego weaved inside there.
Yeah. I mean, my ego is pretty big. It is. And it got only bigger in my 20s. And I think it's been, when I said at the beginning, like, understanding my place in the world, I think I've always personally lived trying to be true to that. And there was a period of my life where I believed I was a lot bigger, greater, more powerful than I was, or than what I should have been. I don't think any human's actually meant to be famous, especially a human working a cubicle job in Denver, Colorado, making minimum wage, and then in 6 months gets thrown on national television. I had no, tangible skill sets that brought me that fame. Like, I wasn't a singer. I wasn't an artist. I wasn't a great speaker. I'm just a guy who was single at the right time in the right place and ends up on television. And so at some point, I had to come to terms with that, and also become really okay with the fact that I was not meant to be famous. Now, if fame comes to people, great. It's not a bad thing. It's not evil. But but then the question immediately has to go, what am I going to do with it? And that's been, again, going back, one of the ways that I've kept my ego in check is by, in the last 7 years, trying to enter into projects, trying to spend most of my time focused on the idea that I get to be a part of other people's stories, hoping that they also want to hear mine, but that I get to be a part of other people's stories. It takes the focus off of me. So, the greater I become, it doesn't mean the greater the business becomes or the greater my marriage becomes. In fact, that's usually been the opposite.
Yeah. It's interesting because, and people, everyone has an opinion about faith, and you've been very forthcoming about your faith. And I think that even despite having maybe a negative opinion, not me, but having a negative opinion about faith, I think the good thing about all faiths is that there's an act of selflessness that you sort of have to embody. And I'm just wondering if that, I would, do you think that you'd be more prone to the ego and the self had you, not had your faith? Do you think that, having that faith, if anything, it gets you to this place where, like what you said earlier, which is, this isn't about, your friend telling you this isn't about you. It's always been, you were given this platform so that you could use it to help other people. And I'm wondering how much of, your faith has had an impact on that.
It's a great question. It's 100%. I mean, there's nothing that I do in my life that does not come back to, my faith journey, my faith tradition. As a Christian, like, I do believe that there's something greater than me out there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I just believe that in my soul, in my gut and experience. And so, yes, I couldn't live my life without that truth being woven through everything. I think, part of my faith journey also, though, is one of the reasons why I feel isolated at times, because as I've experienced the world and experienced people and experienced human story, my faith tradition as a Christian, even though true, also has brought about some really weird conversations and very big moments of isolation, because there's not many people that I feel like are in my tribe or in my camp in that, right? Like, I have a very different experience personally. I've asked myself a lot of questions about what can this faith mean, and what does the tradition mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's hard for me to find a community around my faith because it is more progressive in thought, but also has a conservative, foundation to it because of where I'm from and because of my experiences.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no chance, and I think a lot of faiths do this, I think there's no chance that my life has a peace to it and also an excitement around me not becoming greater, but a peace around helping others without my faith.
Right.
It feels like, within Christian talk, like my calling, my purpose, my reasoning for having life and having breath. This feels like I'm living in it. And so, yeah, I would say my faith is the only reason I'm doing that. Because, for all the bad things that maybe Christians are associated with today, some of the good is that, like, the fundamentals is that you should care for others, right?
Sure.
Like, I mean, and so if that's as simple as that, then, I'm living in that,
right.
I feel like, or at least trying to.
Speaking of caring for others, your friend Annie, who passed away when she was 23, you said there was a specific, phrase that stuck with you. But one thing I wanted to relate it to is with something that was spoken about on the Typology podcast, which was you have a problem being happy with the 65%. You always want to be happy with 100%, right? Like, if you're only, is that ringing about the 65% versus 100%?
No, right.
You said something like, it's hard for me to be happy with, a little bit of the progress that I've made. And instead of, I want to be happy when I've made all the progress.
Sure.
But what Annie was saying is that, eventually, you don't know how much time you have, and then when your time is up, it'll be up.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So I'm wondering, since that conversation, have you been easier on yourself about being happy with the progress that you've made up until now, even if every day you probably do get up and say, I wish that I would have, been better yesterday. I wish I would have gotten this done. It still isn't done. Are you finding it as you mature in age, like that you're getting easier on yourself? Because one day it will be your last day, and you might not know when that day is. Will you have been proud of what you've done? Can you say that about yourself now versus maybe back then when you're a little bit more difficult on yourself?
Yeah, that rings a bell now. So I have a hard time celebrating small wins, small successes, or big wins. They could even be big. I don't know how you quantify good things in life, but small or big wins, I just have a hard time celebrating that joy. It goes back to my worst case scenario. In my life, when I've experienced deep joy and deep excitement, my chemistry or just life experience automatically goes to, but something bad is about to come. And so, I think one of the lessons that I've learned is the more you speak, and sometimes I wasn't even familiar with this being an issue or something I wanted to work on, but sometimes when you get inside conversations and you say something and it rings true to you, or somebody else says something that rings true to you, it's brought to light. And the more I talk about it, the better I can become from it, or at least I recognize it. And so, yes, at Generous, so the coffee company, we donate 100% of our profits to nonprofits. A lot of times we don't see the benefits of where our money's going, right? The nonprofit gets it, they go off, and hopefully somebody gets clean water or get access to school or whatever. And our team was struggling with this. I was struggling with this. And so I'm giving this example to kind of answer your question. So one of our sayings now at Generous that we say as a team is, if one life has changed because of the work we've done, then it's all been worth it. I would like to believe that life has already been changed. And so hopefully at some point it's millions, but we just celebrate the fact that if one life is better because of my time here on earth, then this whole thing's been worth it. And I believe that. We want to believe that. We want to believe that to be true. We don't want to stop us at one. We want to keep going.
Right.
And so, yes, I think I've gotten better or easier on myself. It's also, some of this is like my driving like motivation too. Like I don't want to just, simply not still be passionate, I guess, about helping others. I want to still continue to wake up every morning and still want to get out there and do stuff and not just be comfortable in my, hey, we've done it mentality. Kind
of something that is ringing a bell to me that I wanted to bring up is, it's not quite off topic, but the for-profit Generous Coffee donates 100% of its profits, which happens to be about 10% of the revenue. Have you ever thought about this very interesting correlation between the 10% of revenue that you're donating and the 10%, a tenth, that you're supposed to tithe? Yeah. Has that ever kind of...
It's really weird because this was never part of it. That this has been based on our financials. So yes, I have thought about this. It is really weird how it's worked out. Where we donate 100% of our profits. So that's our operating profits. So once we pay for our building, our staff, our cost of goods, all the expenses that go into running a business, what's left over? And so when we started this was in my garage in Denver, right? And it was still 10% because we had debt to pay off and we had loans to pay off and we didn't have a building, we had other expenses. As we've grown now to have our own building with our own staff and people, it's still 10%. And I always tell people, you can look at our financials. I'll open up the books for you. It is 10% it's fluctuated between 10 and 12. 12 is the highest we've been able to get. I would love to get to 15 one day. But it feels like the more we grow and the more we budget and kind of our strategic plans, 10% is still what's left. And it comes off the top and it hurts but it's awesome. It hurts in this like most beautiful way. So yes, there is this weird relationship. And it's just worked out that way. It's never been planned that way. It's how the numbers have came out.
Elliot, can you explain for people that maybe don't know what tithing is?
I think that most people do. But, the church, the Christian, I grew up Christian. My parents still tithe 10%. My dad's been tithing 10% probably for the last 30 years of his life. But that's just what you're called to do. You're called to tithe a tenth in the Bible. It doesn't say 10% of your money, but a tenth of, essentially what you have, what you own. And that's something that always stuck with me is that, even when my dad was not doing well at all, and really, really struggling, he was always, committed to tithing 10% and always writing the check in front of me, always. Like we would Sunday morning, he was to be an example and to show me. And so while I may not, agree with in the same way that he does, as far as the, Christianity is concerned, I still have a massive amount of faith for that. And just as we were doing research, I just thought there's no way that Ben has not thought about this and how special that relationship is, that, your revenue is 10% and that you're called to essentially what you're doing is just giving it away. Yeah. And that's a pretty cool thing,
Yeah. It was not, so that was not the intention to give 10%. For us, it was to give 100% of profits. We wanted to show, and we have people within our organization that do not share the same faith tradition as myself. So our whole goal was to take what I believe is a universal calling, which is generosity, and to show it in the most radical way, which is through a for-profit business donating 100% of its profits. Right. And to kind of be a model for other businesses around the world to try to do the same. Sure. And it just happened to fall where it is. Yeah. And so it's cool. I mean, it's great for us, but it's not intentional. Yeah.
I want to go back a little bit talking about inner circle and these kind of 4 people that you can trust to call you out when you need it, but also celebrate you when you're doing awesome things. Elliot mentioned it before in your book, which is called Alone in Plain Sight. You've talked about this sense of being on the outside looking in or feeling like an outsider. I know a lot of people resonate with that. I know a lot of people have approached you and let you know that they resonate with that.
Especially probably men.
Yeah.
Sure. And as we think about personal development, that is a lot of internal work, but you also make the point in the book to talk about being better together, and that there is also work alongside people that help ground and anchor you in that personal development.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious about how you find people like that to act as those anchors in your life.
Yeah, so, I got lucky. I've had really good friends since high school. So those 4 guys have been guys I've known since high school. I trust them. Like I said, they have shown to be wise counsels to me. I think, outside of that group, my community has come, especially again, coming from Denver without knowing anybody. The show did help me make friendships, right? You're around a lot more people. You're invited to more things. You find people with similar interests.
Mm-hmm.
If you take that out of it, I think my community has been built around church, also just volunteering. Like there's things I'm very passionate about, and just showing up to volunteer events. Because I believe if other people are going to show up to these same things that I'm very passionate about, they're probably going to be people I'm intrigued by, interested in, and probably pretty wise.
Sure.
Totally.
In business, right? You have a lot today, like a very common thing is entrepreneurs is, connection groups, networking groups, because for the most part, outside of, maybe your C-level execs, most people are running a small business, and it's a very lonely island of a lot of hurdles and a lot of ups and downs and a lot of good days and bad days. And so those networking groups, I think, were created for this purpose as well. And over time for me, it's been just being willing to get to know people. And, you said it earlier, I'd never thought about it. But when you guys were opening up, you said something about like vulnerability, and a lot of men would view it as a weakness. The weird part is I've never, ever felt like anybody's ever viewed me weaker for sharing my vulnerabilities. I think there's been appropriate times for me. Maybe I've messed up and shared too much at inappropriate times. And people are a little bit like, well, this dude has stuff. Like I don't want to hang out with him. But I've always felt it as one of those connection pieces to build that community. So as I talk about my pains, my struggles, also my successes, the things I'm learning, the things I'm excited about, I recognize that I've realized that some people are kind of gravitated into that as well. And maybe vice versa. I can also be intrigued by them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how my friendships, my community has been built. But I've always kind of led with this is who I am. It might not be who I am tomorrow, but right now in this moment, this is who I am. Take it or leave it. Or push me on it. I would love to have a conversation about what I'm saying, what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
And if we're having a very good conversation, like I'd like to hang out with you again.
Yeah. I find it fascinating that you've never viewed, oversharing, or not being oversharing, but being vulnerable as a sign of weakness. And as he's saying that, I'm thinking, okay, that sort of goes hand in hand with what we're talking about social media. Like I feel like it's a little bit of poison, because I feel like I'm trying to think of where
how that
learned
seed
that
got
from.
planted.
It's absolutely from the internet. I feel like I've so many times, on social media, on Twitter, on Instagram, that men, that we shouldn't overshare, that we shouldn't share our successes, even with our friends, because you don't want to overshare, because then, people will start to feel a certain way about you. I don't really know I'm going with this. I just think it's fascinating that you've never really considered that. And that's probably a good thing. But for me, it's good to hear, because, social media is a vacuum. And sometimes you think that the way that it is the way that it is. And it's not. Like you're also saying hurt people. So a lot of those things that I'm reading are also probably projections from people who are very insecure, who have been judged by others in their lives, And so, I'm pretty fascinated
if anything,
by that.
I feel like I felt more courageous when I've shared. And for years I didn't, because I didn't think it was what I was supposed to do. But when I finally did, then I felt more courageous, and I also had more people intrigued by it. And I'm sure there's some people out there. I mean, there's a wide variety of humans, but I've never felt weaker or been told I was weaker for sharing.
Yeah, that's good.
And maybe the reasoning is because men and women both just desire it. They want that access point, and when somebody does it, then they say, "Yeah, me too." and that builds community, that builds connection.
Exactly.
So yeah, I've never been ashamed, I guess, in the right, again, given the right circumstances, by sharing my successes, my struggles, my pains.
That's great.
Ben, I'm hearing you say that by leading with authenticity and vulnerability, you are then maybe turning off the people that aren't quite meant to vibe with you and be in your life, while also attracting people that resonate with it and then also want to do that alongside you. So this might be the answer, but my other question alongside this is, how do you be that anchor and that friend to the people in your inner circle?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of a muscle built over time within relationship, where they know that you're a safe space. I don't think it happens right away, but I think they recognize you to be a safe space, and they just recognize that you're curious and that you care. And so for me, one of the question that when I have people ask, how do we build friendships, or, my friends don't want to talk to me about anything. Why is that? And so as we dive deep and go through it, one of my favorite questions just in relationships to ask somebody is just tell me more. And that's not just because it's an easy fix. It's because typically there isn't the right question to ask in that moment when somebody's pouring their guts out to you, or also telling you about, hey, I just got the promotion at the job. It's just tell me more about this job. Tell me more about, what's hurting you. Just tell me more, because I don't want to just hear what you're going to tell everybody else in the next week of your life. I want to hear the details of it. Like, what are you excited about? What are you, fearful of? Who are you going to be working with? Just tell me more. And that muscle build over time, I think, brings people, and I think it helps them recognize too, that like when I talk to Ben, hopefully, like he actually wants to hear what I have to say.
Sure.
And he wants to hear more of what I have to say than what I would tell anybody else. And so people continue to come back, or you'd hope they would. And if they don't, that's on them, or that's their decision. But they come back because they're like, I know if I talk to Ben, he's going to want to know everything. And that's what I love about that.
I think this episode should be titled Ben Higgins, Tell Me More.
That's perfect.
I love those words.
Yeah. I like
Those are some big time words. The last portion of your press kit is maybe the overlooked portion of all that you have going on, from The Bachelor to Alone in Plain Sight to Generous Coffee. But I think it's an extremely powerful question that I think we should be asking each other more often. And I'm going to frame this for men. And in your press kit at the end, it says, millennials are consistently told they're selfish, and Gen Z is already being labeled as entitled. We're quick to point out the flaws of younger generations, but what if we called them up instead of calling them out? And I think that's unlike anything I've ever heard, that last part, calling them up instead of calling them out. So I want you to expand upon that a little bit and think about younger men that are, or I guess Gen Zs and millennial men.
Yeah. I mean, I think, again, going back, and hopefully nobody's turned off by it, but everything, like my worldview and the way I see people, all is coming from a faith center. So I believe a few things about people. I believe all people matter. I believe all people are created equal. That, not to go back to, our founding documents. I believe that all people are created on purpose and for a purpose. And I also believe that I get one shot at this world. And so that, again, to be clear, like, people might disagree with that, some of those things. But if I get one shot at this world, I believe that I was put on this earth at this time, in this moment, with these people that are also on this globe with me, for a reason. And I personally find it not helpful, and not satisfying, and not loving to be a critic consistently. A critic also, I think, comes from a place of judgment. I also just don't think it's my role to be the judge.
Sure.
Again, going back to my faith, I just don't believe that's my role at any level. And so I would hate to live a life that was consistently upset with everybody else. I've had moments of that. I know people who live in that consistently. It doesn't feel like a very joy-filled, peace-filled, kind way to live in this earth. I also think that was written and that was put in there because when you're reading, I remember the moment. I just, if you listen to the older generation, maybe not as much today, but maybe 15 years ago, it was a consistent story of remember back when, when it was better, when it was easier, when it was simpler, when we could do this, we can do that. But that generation, also had their parents saying the same thing about their generation and their generation before it, right? We've always said it. I don't know if that will ever change. Yes, things were simpler 20 years ago. Sure, maybe not easier. And we forget, oftentimes, we forget that we have this revisionist history of this, what it was back then. And so I think now what I want to do, and again, it goes back to checking myself, is to be somebody that just lifts people up. Because I don't want to be like everybody else who just talks about what it was back then. I have a lot of life of hope in front of me. I desire a lot of life in front of me. I desire a lot of amazing opportunities. I want to be known for somebody, again, that gave more than he took. I also want to be known for somebody that just didn't live in the past and live angry all the time. And so what does it look like then to lift people up? It goes back to a little bit of the tell me more, asking people to tell you more about their story. I think it's really hard just to not like somebody once you get to know somebody. And so once you get to know them, and then it's just being somebody that gets and kind of builds the muscle of speaking truth into people. Hey, I believe that you guys are incredible hosts. I believe you care deeply about people. That's why we're doing this today. That's why this is a passion of yours. Telling people what you see in them in the light of like what they're going to bring to the world, and not as much as what they should be doing for the world. And I think if we did that consistently, especially if we had mentors in my generation, and the generation above me, the generation above them, and then also continue that down, below. If we just had people that were desiring to see the best out of people and speak that truth into them, I believe we would all start to find some commonality again too. And so lifting people up, bringing people up, is yes, you're not going to love everything they're doing. You're not going to understand everything they stand for, but you're going to be able to still see the beauty in their world and in their life.
Right.
And I think for me, again, as somebody who believes that people matter, then I believe that every human also has some really beautiful parts. And I want to focus on that more than the critic.
Sure.
I think it's really profound you saying that it's really hard to dislike someone or to criticize them the more you get to know them. And that brings me back to our earlier discussion around like social media and boundaries. I'm curious about what are like the tangible ways that you put up boundaries between you and your consumption of social media and how you're on and how you engage, because that I also think is a muscle. So when we, find ourselves scrolling 8 hours on Twitter or TikTok or whatever, it's a little bit easier to filter the world through that negativity and that anger versus practicing the other muscle of compassion and empathy and understanding and curiosity.
Yeah. Social media is such a weird thing where you have camps that are very much against it, saying, hey, we should get rid of it. You have then also people, saying, hey, it's a great connection point for me and my friends who live across the world from each other. For me, I have a couple statements I'd make on that. One, I've never liked anybody more because I follow them on social media. I've never felt like I've become a fan or become a friend of somebody because I get to see their pictures. That's not how I build friendship. I met my wife through social media. I messaged her on Instagram. I had to get to know her before I actually realized that, I want to spend my life with her.
Sure.
So there is good parts, but I've never followed anybody and been like, I like that person so much more because of their social media. It's just not, maybe it's just, I'm on my own in that. I just haven't. I also think social media is really, really hard for the human brain to experience, because what we do is we go through, and I've heard it simplified to say it's just a snapshot of everybody's beautiful life. I don't think that's true, because I have some people on my feed right now, I bet, that are crying and sad and, going through pains. But what I do think is true is that it's, I don't think I, at least as a human, am prepared for the emotional roller coaster that social media brings me on when I scroll. Because I get something really good and then I get something really bad, and then I feel envy and then I feel sadness. And it's like within seconds, my mind, my body is just experiencing all these different emotions, and I don't know how to handle it. And it usually spits me out in a place of chaos mentally. And so the boundaries I set again is, there's a certain point in the day where it's not a part of my life anymore. And I don't wake up and get on my phone right away. I wake up, my practice is to pray or to contemplate or to meditate. People can call it all different types of things. But what it is it's sometimes in silence. For me, it's praying to something I believe is greater than myself, asking for my feet to hit the ground in a good place that day, and to be a welcoming force for those who come around me. Awesome. It's also a moment for me to let my thoughts flow through me. The concerns of the night before. What was I confronting last night? What do I need to do today about it? Who do I need to text or call to maybe heal a wound that has been, wedged between this relationship? Those types of thoughts. And then I get out of my bed, go get my coffee, do whatever, maybe go work out. And then I can maybe feel like, I'm in a more settled place to let's look and see what my friends are doing. It's not like I don't get on it. It's not like it's not a part of my life. It definitely is. I think the other boundary is my wife and I have this new rule in our house. It's awesome. We don't have many rules in our house, but we mutually come together on a few. One is when we pray at night, we pray for the outsider, for the people that are hurting, and help us to be attuned to those. The second rule we have is when we talk about or we see somebody that like strikes us. So for an example, last night, I have a buddy who is a gay Christian, unfairly outed years ago, did this incredible episode, this podcast with him and his dad, who is a leader within the church. It's a beautiful, beautiful podcast where he tells his story.
What's it called?
It's Annie F. Downs' podcast. So if you go to Annie F. Downs' podcast called That Sounds Fun,
okay,
it's 100% worth the listen. Him and his dad kind of sitting down, coming from two very different places in life, very much disagreeing on life choices, but loving each other so well. Awesome message for anybody. I think, conservative Christianity and also progressive Christianity and people outside of Christianity would all really benefit from hearing the conversation. But we both had listened to the episode and we're just like, goodness, that was awesome by the two of them. Like, what an incredible gift that they gave us by sitting down with Annie. And so instead of just talking about it together, we sent them a message right away and just said, hey, because that's our rule now. When somebody comes up in our life that we're proud of something they're doing, or we're excited about something they're doing, or we're just thinking about them, we have to send them a text or a phone call.
Love that.
It's awesome. And it's like one of the fun ways at dinner that we actually pick up our phone. We usually don't have our phones around us at dinner. But when we are sitting around the table and we're talking about something, we just send them a text and say, hey, that was like last night. I think my text was like, that was an incredible gift. I'm in awe of like your leadership and your stewardship and like the way you care for each other. That was it. But that's a really fun way to use social media for us. So we see something and they're like talking about a job promotion. Instead of just being like, hey, it was really cool they got a job. It's like, no, we text them then and say, hey, awesome that you got a job. We're really like excited for you. So those are the muscles we build, try to find good ways to do it. And also it slows it down a bit to be intentional about what we're actually doing on social media, like why we're actually on it.
Right.
I had a friend, I'll share this story really quick from the show, who he did an incredible thing where he called me, this was years ago, he called me and said, I've been really mad at you. I said, what have you been mad at me for? We haven't seen each other in like a year. And he goes, I've been mad at you because I follow you on social media and it feels like everything in your life is working out really well. And nothing in my life feels to be working out really well. And I've developed a lot of envy and jealousy. And as a result, like I've just started to not like you. And I felt like, he said, I felt like I needed to call and tell you that.
Wow.
Now, obviously that's a great door to open for like a healing moment, for like conversation, for those tough conversations to exist, which usually leads to a lot deeper relationship. But that's another way you could use it.
Yeah.
Hey, like I see this and like, I'm not really that pumped for you and I don't know why. And I wanted you to know that so that like we can confront the issue.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really, really, that doesn't happen very often. That's hard to do, but that's pretty awesome. We did get a lot of listener questions. We don't have time to answer all of these questions, so I think that we should do like the first three. Here we go. Ben Higgins, what are some of your proudest moments? No, what is your proudest moment that you can think of right now? And what did it teach you?
My proudest moment right now is being in Honduras with a young lady who had just gotten clean water. And it was due to the efforts of mostly Bachelor Nation and helping put this clean water in. And understanding at that moment that every piece of my story could still be good. So that's what it taught me.
Love that. All those moments, like The Bachelor, all those moments led to this.
Yeah.
Right? And you changed her life.
Yeah. And I wouldn't be here today without that show either.
Yeah.
So
for sure. Yeah. What is something intangible that fulfills you? That's a good one.
That's a great one. I think prayer, meditation, contemplation. I do. When I met my wife, I was going through a public breakup, as we mentioned. I was living in this little tiny house in northern Denver, all alone. Didn't have any furniture, and I told her, this one thing that I do that really helps me out is I turn off all the lights. I light a candle, and I played this playlist that I have curated on my phone, and I just let my thoughts flow over me. And she was like, that's super weird. I've never heard anybody do that. And I was like, it actually probably would be really weird if anybody ever walked by and looked. Because I'm just sitting alone on this like little lawn chair in the middle of my living room. But that practice has turned into a lot of contemplation. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing for me to do. So just let my thoughts flow over me, like to sit in silence and say, where am I at today? Sometimes that's such a great place. And I'm like, wow, you crushing it. Like, you really did well in that moment. And the other times, like, hey, you got things that you got to figure out. But it's just getting in tune with myself again, kind of having a conversation with, God and myself is kind of something that really helps me out.
Great. Why did you choose to go on The Bachelor?
The Bachelorette and then The Bachelor.
Sure. And
what has made you stay a part of the franchise?
So the Bachelorette story in short is this. I moved to Denver. I did it because of a breakup, and I was living in Indiana with my parents at the time. And the breakup, when this girl broke up with me, she's awesome. She's a great friend. I thought she was the love of my life. And she said, "You've lost your it factor." And she's like, "You're never going to leave home." She was right. I was never going to leave home. I was very comfortable, very confident. Was an only child. Probably could have lived in my parents' house till I was 40 and been fine. And so when she said that, I was like, no, I'm going to prove you wrong. Because one thing I've always taken pride in is I didn't want to be like every other only child. I wanted to never be this selfish only child because my parents were very intentional about that. Long story short, come to Denver, no friends, not very good at my job, but working all the time. The marketing director at my company came up and she said, you're the youngest person at this company. You don't love your job. You work all the time. You're not dating. There's this show that I love, and I would love for you to sign you up for it. Would you be willing if they called? And I was like, and honestly, I think my mind went back to that it factor statement. Yeah, this would give me a story to talk about. I think my friends would think I'm cool. I think people would think I'm cool. I'm going to go do this show. So we signed up, they called, and I just went on. Not knowing where it would lead and not knowing the lessons I would learn about myself through that. I think I had to reach what I thought was like the pinnacle of being cool.
Sure.
For my friends to tell me in person, like, you're now just king of the nerds, like you went on a dating show. And then coming back down to earth and being like, okay, what does all this mean again?
Right.
But it was really to create a different story for my life than I was doing because I just didn't think my path was going anywhere interesting. I'm sure it would have.
Yeah.
But at the time, I couldn't see it.
How did that change from The Bachelorette to The Bachelor? Like, they invited you back to be The Bachelor, right?
Yeah. Not really relatable at all because I got off The Bachelorette, and on The Bachelorette is when I told people I felt unlovable or unlikable.
Right.
So that opened up this whole new door where now people knew me because of that, and they wanted to talk to me about that. And that was adding a lot of richness to my life, like a lot of depth to my life, a lot of cool conversations in my life. So that happened. And then 3 months later, they asked me to be The Bachelor. And so I think I went into it with a different level of like confidence, but also humility, because I'd gone back home. I'd seen that my friends still didn't think I was that cool, but they were like super interested to hear the story. I could see that my parents loved me the same way. And so I went into The Bachelor just feeling more, I think, like grounded. And I said yes to it because it is a fantastic opportunity. And it was still a new, cool experience. I was at that point in my life, I was 26. I was trying to say yes to everything. And this was a very clear, like, yes. A little backstory too was I had prayed this prayer and I said, if this isn't for right, and I don't get like hooky spooky Christian very often. I don't like necessarily operate very well in that world, and it typically leads to a weird place. But I just said this prayer because I didn't know where else to turn. I said, close the door. Tell for my friends to tell me it's a bad idea, for my family to tell me it's a bad idea, or for my work to tell me it's a bad idea. And all three threw the door wide open. My work was like, go take a 6-month sabbatical. Like, come back when you're ready. My family was like, go do this. Why not? My friends were like, yeah, you're going to be king of the nerds. Like, we'll love to watch, like, laugh at you on television. And so when all those doors flew open, I was like, I'm going to say yes. Like, I don't know. I don't have a reason to say no. I'm glad I didn't. Right. But different in the sense that I just went in The Bachelor a little bit more, I think, grounded.
Yeah. Yeah, we're glad you didn't either. I mean, it's led to some really amazing things, and we're really, truly, man, we're grateful that you're here. I mean, it's a big deal to you to take the time to come into our living room. And is Kristen is not sexual at all, right?
Christen? No,
No.
you're thinking of consummate.
Okay, good.
Good.
And christen our apartment
Yeah.
with the first.
I'm glad you said Kristen, not consummate. Yeah, that's good.
with the first episode.
That could be your headline.
Right there. You go.
No, I'd veto that.
Yeah. So we appreciate it, man. And as a thank you, we want to give you those hats. So give
one to Jess, one to you.
Give one to
you.
Jess. We're going to give you some tea. And
are awesome.
for those watching, that's how you can support us. We really appreciate you watching. You can find our tea. The tea is amazing. Ben can attest
awesome.
to that. And we've got some hats. We've got some merch. So if you want to support us in that way, you can.
And you can support Ben by buying generous. Is there
I was gonna
anything
get there,
else?
but yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead. No, go. Do
Stole your
it.
thunder.
Do it.
Are there any other ways that people can support you, keep along with you, all the things?
So generouscoffee.com is the best way to like support an effort that I care most about. So that is the best way to buy coffee for your large gatherings, small gatherings, etc. We do wholesale and retail. You can see on our website right now the organizations that we're supporting currently and that we have supported in the past. So generouscoffee.com would be the best way. Also, you can kind of follow along on thebenhiggins.com. That website was only the Ben Higgins because benhiggins.com was taken. So the Ben Higgins is always something I got to preface. Like it wasn't my choice. It wasn't what I wanted. But you can kind of follow along if I'm speaking in an area near you or we're doing like a little gathering about come sit with me. Those are always fun for me to see people of all different types come in. It's fun for me there because I get this really awkward interaction with people where they're like, we didn't watch you on The Bachelor. I'm like, no, that's awesome.
great.
That's great. I'm glad you're just here.
Yeah.
Like, that's so cool.
Yeah.
That's a little taste of like that things have grown outside of it, right?
Sure.
And then finally, I'd say I'm most active on Instagram. I don't have a lot of other social media, but if I am going to post a big life update, it's going to be on there.
Yeah.
And so if you want to follow along on that, it's not very active, but it's something.
Thanks so much, Ben.
Thank you.
Appreciate you, man.
Appreciate it.
We're ditching the surface level relationships, so join us in creating something more human.
We're so happy that you're here, and we always want to go deeper with you. So we created the Something More Society. It's the go-to place to level up your connection, community, and collaboration. We have monthly book clubs, exclusive chat channels, mini episodes and Q&As with Elliot and I, and so much more.
If you're enjoying the show and want to find other ways to support, you can hit follow or subscribe on your favorite listening or viewing platform. Leaving a 5-star review would go a long way, along with a thoughtful review. Thank you so much.
Love you guys.